Trump wasn't going to meet Putin to try and pursue peace. Alaska was a setup for the Russians. Alaska was designed to create the perception of the spirit of Alaska, to breathe life into Steve Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev's, economic prosperity notion, never intending to do it. Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, was never going to allow the sanctions to be lifted. He wanted to break Russia, bring him to his knees. And I thought Bessent was off the reservation. Turns out Bessent was doing exactly what Trump wanted him to do. The bottom line is Alaska was setting up Vladimir Putin for failure by deliberately creating the conditions for the creation of a fifth column inside Russia. These new political elites who were thinking they were starting to spend the money they were going to make with all these great deals before the sanctions were lifted. Then Trump said, I can't lift the sanctions because of Vladimir Putin. It was all a setup. And then he tried to kill him, of course. Trump is a liar. I mean, Trump treated the American people like we were the perfect wife. I mean, he bought us flowers. He gave us perfume on our birthday. He whispered all the right things in our ears. He was there for every important event. And then we married him. It turns out he had a mistress the whole time. And that mistress was war. And this is what he wanted. This is the real Donald Trump. He lied to the American people. And now the constitutional republic is dead in the water. We have a president who puts his own morality over the rule of law, over the Constitution. He says, I am more important than the Constitution. I am more relevant than the Constitution. And I will be the only one that gets to make these decisions. Constitutional due process is out the window. The constitutional republic's in a lot of trouble if it's not dead already.
So of what value is the Constitution? Of what value are treaties? Of what value are contracts? Of what value are federal laws if the president is restrained only by his own sense of morality and, quote, my own mind? They're of no value.
None. There's no value. And look, the Russians, I believe, have woken up. I can't speak on behalf of Russia. Contrary to popular belief, Vladimir Putin's not on my speed dial, and we don't confer every morning. But the fact is, I do study Vladimir Putin. I do study the Russian government. I study how they make policy. And I believe that the Russians had bought into the notion of Trump's sincerity. But all it takes is 91 drones coming towards the Russian president's residence to find out that they were targeted by the CIA at the direction of the president of the United States at a time when the president was talking about bettering relations, et cetera. That's a wake-up call. Next month, I think February 6th, the New START treaty, last remaining arms control treaty between the United States and Russia, expires. There was some hope that it could be extended. There was some hope that there could be a voluntary moratorium on capping the nuclear weapons that are linked to that. Not anymore. The Russians, I believe, I'll give you a reason why I believe this. I was supposed to go to Russia in March and April to participate in a fascinating exercise with the Gorky Institute in St. Petersburg, working with IMGIMO, the Russian diplomatic university. We were going to hold mock treaty negotiations on how to enhance New START. We were going to talk about intermediate nuclear forces and anti-ballistic missiles and what daylight or what agreement could be found. And we were recruiting teams to do this. I had teams of advisors we're going to go over. The Russians have come back and said, no, we're done. There is no arms control. There's no future in arms control. We don't believe in arms control, and we're not going to go through the motions of pretending that we believe in arms control. So, that's where we're at. It's dead. It's finished. There is no. We're in a middle of a new nuclear arms race where Russia owns all of the advantages. Russia has the more modern nuclear assets. Russia has the better doctrine. And you asked a question up front about the Oreshnik. By launching the second Oreshnik, Russia has now said that the Oreshnik missile, this intermediate range missile, is now a foundational part of our nuclear strategic deterrence against Europe and the United States. It's been operationalized. Dmitry Medvedev's tweet afterwards basically said that we now have the ability to destroy Europe, and it's part of who we are. Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister, came out and said, we got Oreshnik and we've got more. We got more coming out, better stuff. The Russians aren't going to give this away. They have overmatch right now. They dominate. And the whole purpose of arms control is to create parity. And the Russians are like, why would we give up that which guarantees our survival at a time when you're trying to kill our president. And remember, it's not just trying to kill the president. They launched drone strikes against the bombers. They've launched drone strikes against the early warning radars. They're attacking Russia's oil production capabilities to break the Russian economy. This is straight up war against Russia. And so the Russians are like, well, why would we enter a negotiation that would have us yield these advantages? We're not going to do that. We have the advantages. You're the enemy. We're keeping this. Sadly, Judge, I have to report that arms control is dead.
Does the Kremlin recognize that Alaska was a setup?
What I can say is this, that people who advise the Kremlin and people whose opinion is considered by the Kremlin, very senior people who I've been in conversation with, they believe, and they have said straight up that it's a setup, that this process is dead in the water. I think the Russians always keep the diplomatic door open. And keep in mind this, during the Biden administration, there was zero communication between Russia and the United States. That's a very dangerous thing. Right now, there is channels of communication. And I believe the Russians recognize the importance of keeping these channels of communication open. And so they're not going to come straight out and say things. Russia always keeps their cards close to their chest. So they have said are not ending negotiations with the United States. But they said because of this attack on the president, the character of these negotiations is changed fundamentally, which means that there are no negotiations about the settlement in Ukraine. This war will end violently with Russia, getting everything it wants through military force. That's where we're at. But I believe the Kremlin knows this, but I also believe that the Kremlin is pragmatic and doesn't give away its cards, and therefore they'll keep the pretense of negotiations in play. But they are very open. I mean, that's one thing about the Russians. They're just honest. And they said, no, the nature of negotiations are done. We're not playing that game anymore. So there's no doubt where Russia stands on this. There will be no negotiated into this conflict.
Chris, have that. You can post that full screen. Over the weekend, President Trump proclaimed himself to be the acting president of Venezuela. Do you think he's of sound mind?
No. I believe that act, combined with his statement about his morality trumping law, is de facto evidence that he is no longer fit for office. And I believe that the 25th Amendment should be implemented as soon as possible. I believe if J.D. Vance has a functioning brain cell, he has to understand how dangerous this is. I believe that Scott Bessent needs to. Marco Rubio won't, because this is Marco Rubio's dream right now. Marco Rubio, he's dual-hatted. I mean, this is the nefarious nature of Marco Rubio, where he can sit there and pretend to engage in diplomacy with Russia. I mean, my God, how can the Russians ever look this guy in the eye again? Then he puts on his national security advisor hat, holds the secret NSC meeting where he directs the CIA to assassinate the Russian president, because this came from Marco Rubio. This came from the National Security Council. So the problem by allowing this is why the Senate is so important. People always get frustrated during the Senate confirmation hearings about cabinet members. They're like, why not just give the president the people he wants? Because if the president goes insane, as this one clearly has, the cabinet, if they're a bunch of similarly inclined, non-constitutional individuals, they won't step in and use the 25th Amendment the way it should be used. The Senate
he's not literally the acting president of Venezuela. The Constitution prohibits the American president from holding a foreign office. But for him to say something like that, if he believes
Judge,
it.
I disagree with you. He is acting as, look, tell me how else he can say, we got 30 to 50 million barrels of Venezuelan oil that's going to be sold and put in offshore accounts that I manage. That's his direction. Okay, that's what he's saying. Now, that is patently illegal,
Yes.
unconstitutional.
Yes.
This is where the cabinet steps in and says, no, Mr. President, you don't get to do that. It's against the law. And the fact that you're even considering doing this makes us think you're mentally unbalanced. The vice president, we've come together and we're removing you. You're done. You're finished. But the fact is, people treat this as a joke. It's not a joke. This is a symptom of the illness, this mental illness that this man has. This is a mentally ill president.
I'm going to play the most offensive statement he made in his 2-hour interview with the New York Times. It's only about 20 seconds long. This reinforces your argument about mental instability, and it's a very dark and gloomy tone. Chris, number 2.
Do you see any checks on your power on the world stage? Is there anything that could stop you if you wanted to?
Yeah, there's one thing, my own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop, and that's
law.
very good. I don't need international law. I'm not looking to hurt.
Not looking to hurt people. He just sent Delta Force into a compound, murdered over 100 people to carry out an illegal abduction. Not looking to hurt people. He's looking to murder people. This is a man who gleefully speaks about the necessity of bombing Iran today as the Iranian government cracks down on so-called protesters. But these aren't protesters. These are violent agitators, organized, trained, equipped, and motivated and led and instructed by the United States and the Mossad. This is a CIA Mossad operation. The Iranians broke the code. Hey, Elon, you're not as smart as you think you are, buddy. Letting the CIA and Mossad use Starlink to communicate with these people. The Russians broke that code a long time ago in Ukraine, and they shared that information with the Iranians, who read everything, and that's why it's over. They rounded everybody up, and they're going to execute them all because they have the proof. These aren't demonstrators, innocent demonstrators. These are Mossad agents, CIA agents, actively working to bring down a sovereign government. But the president ordered that. He doesn't care about life. And here's the key thing with the American people. He doesn't care about American life. I'm not an expert on, domestic law and all that. ICE executed a lady in broad daylight. Now, you can come up with all the crap you want about a car and all that. They had intent to do harm when they started. ICE is an occupying army in American cities that are murdering Americans, arresting Americans, and this president is encouraging this and facilitating this. This man is a criminal. A criminal. Thomas Jefferson said it. You hinted at it in your, the tree of liberty has to be washed with the blood of tyrants and patriots on occasion. Now, I'm not advocating for violent revolution, but what I am saying is that we have constitutional remedies to the insanity that exists in Washington, D.C. today. Number one of which is we have the vote of the American people. If this man gets through the midterm elections, and the American people have foregone their responsibilities, because look, if you haven't figured out wherever you stand with MAGA and America First and all that, this is an insane man who he just told you he doesn't care about America. America is defined by the Constitution of the United States of America. We are a constitutional republic. Without the Constitution, we don't exist. And he just said, screw law. I don't need law. I only need my brain. And it's a sick brain. It's a perverted brain. And I'm not talking about Epstein. I'm talking about the perversion of violence, the perversion of death. And the American people can stop that with their vote. And if they don't, then they punt it. Then we're left to the 25th Amendment. And I don't believe that there's a cabinet right now that's capable of implementing the 25th Amendment. So we now have a dictator who has destroyed the constitutional republic that I gave an oath to uphold, defend with my life.
Is Iran ready for the coming attack by Israel in the U.S.?
Oh, yeah. Yes. This is the other thing about being insane like Donald Trump. He believes the things that Pete Hegseth, another insane person. My God, if we ever had a Nuremberg trial of these people, it would be stunning. I mean, America, wake up. We are the Germans. We are the Germans of the 1930s. We are asleep at the wheel as a people while this madman takes over. And he is going to be worse than Hitler because he has access to nuclear weapons. All right? We are Germany in the 1930s. We're watching it happen as we speak. And if there were ever trials, it would be amazing. But this man believes, in the preeminence of American military power, and therefore, I mean, there's other things he said in there. Russia and China aren't afraid of Europe; they're only afraid of me. I got news for you, Donald Trump. They don't fear you. They're concerned about the nuclear weapons you have access to, but you as an individual, they don't fear. They don't respect you. They despise you. They think you're a joke, but you're a dangerous joke, a very dangerous joke. But Russia and China don't fear you, and you're going to find out one day when you wake up and everything's gone south. Iran could be the place where that goes south, because if he goes forward with this stupidity, because the CIA has breathed a whole bunch of, horse dung into his lungs about Venezuela, because they bought off a lot of people and they executed this operation. And the CIA is telling them we can do this in Iran too. All you have to do is bomb the Iranians, and the Iranian people are going to rise up and they're going to remove that Ayatollah. Game's over, Donnie. All your guys are dead. Wake up. They're all dead. Yes, 6,000 people were killed. 6,000 spies were killed by the. I'm sure there were innocent people in there, and I always agree for the innocent. But the point is, Trump believes that he can bomb. The moment you do that, all American bases in the region will be annihilated. Iran's not playing games anymore.
Do we know if any CIA officers were among those arrested?
We don't put the CIA. They're not brave enough to do that kind of stuff, to send their guys into denied areas. No, their guys are all hanging out in Kurdistan and Azerbaijan. Some of them might be down in the Baluch border in Pakistan, running their people. But most of this is done remote control. Again, by Starlink. This is the stupidity of it. Sit there in your little, Langley, Virginia. I don't know what floor these guys are operating on. Maybe they're in the basement. Who knows? But they're sitting there in their little control room, sending out signals or looking at the big map, and moving pieces around and all that stuff. They're not there. They don't have the guts to do that. Even Israel isn't going to put an actual Israeli citizen on the ground. But what's curious is they got the phones of these people. And on the phones, many of them had the same message from a lady speaking Farsi, dressed in, wearing with the flag of the former Shah, giving them instructions about what to do if you're arrested. If you're arrested, condemn the expatriates, make yourself look like a patriot. Don't talk about this, that, and the other thing. She's Israeli. She's an Israeli Mossad agent giving instructions. And the CIA
Farsi.
In Farsi. Yeah. And the CIA did the same thing with Starlink. I mean, again, they have these case officers that think that they're God's gift to the world because nobody holds them to account, and they're playing God. And they sit there and they send directions. Okay, we have cached so many Molotov cocktails here. Get your people here. You need to burn this bank. You need to do this. You need to do that to create this unrest in the city, that then we can come bomb security forces. Then you need to be prepared to move all this. And they're out there drawing big arrows on the board. What they don't realize is the same thing happened in Iran that happened in Iraq. Because I was part of that Iraq thing, not the plotting, but I was aware of it. They used my inspection team. The CIA put 12 covert paramilitary officers on my inspection team in the summer of 1996 to assassinate Saddam Hussein. And they were there on the ground, and they were supposed to be hooking up with the 3rd Battalion of the Special Republican Guard. The one Special Republican Guard unit I wasn't allowed to inspect. I said, I want to inspect them. No. We got this one under control. Well, they had bought off the leadership. And we were supposed to set up an event that would allow the United States to come in with cruise missiles and suppress the Special Republican Guard, except this one battalion, which was then going to marry up with my 12 paramilitary officers and move in, grab Saddam, and get him out of country. That was the operation. What they didn't realize is that all the guys they were sending in to communicate with the Iraqis were being rounded up by the Iraqis as they came across the border. The Iraqis had the communications equipment, told the guys, here's the deal. We can torture you to death and torture your family in front of you to death, or we'll let your family live with a pension. And when this is done, we'll kill you quickly, but you have to play the game. So the guy kept sending and receiving messages. And at the end of the day, when the Iraqis turned around and grabbed these guys, they called the CIA station chief in Amman, Jordan, and said, we've been reading you the whole time. Good luck. And that's what happened here in Iran, too. The CIA is not very good. They're not very good. They can do some things, but they're not as clever as they think. And they're murderous thugs. They don't care about human life. They just sacrificed 6,000 Iranians, and now they're going to go, oops, on to the next project.
Wow. Are there pressures on President Putin to crush the Ukrainian military and destroy the Zelensky government?
There's no pressure on him. That's what he's going to do. General Surovikin, when he took over after the Ukrainian offensive in the fall of 2022, after the United States provided, $48 billion worth of training and equipment, they rebuilt the Ukrainian army. After the Russians began withdrawing their forces as part of the good faith measure they agreed to in Istanbul, the Ukrainians exploited the Russian weakness. 50% of the Russian army had already been withdrawn. There's huge gaps in the line. They weren't expecting anything. The Ukrainians kept sweeping in. So Russia mobilized 300,000 troops, and they appointed Surovikin to be in charge, and his job was to stabilize the lines. And once he did that, everybody's like, well, now you're going to do the big arrow and counterattack. He said, we're not here to sacrifice Russian life. We're here to win this war, and we're going to create the conditions of victory through a war of attrition. And that's what Russia's been doing ever since. And they will continue to do this for as long as it takes. I've stopped trying to put a mark on the calendar. I'm not going to do what the Russian government won't do. All right. I'll be more than happy to assess any date that the Russian government puts up on the calendar. They don't do it, which tells me they're not driven by the calendar. They're driven by results, and the results are dire. The Ukrainians are out of reserves. And so now there's an emergency mobilization order going out to the various territorial recruitment centers. They have to scoop up 50,000 guys overnight and get them to the front lines with no training, where they will die. But that's where they're at. They lost 15 to 20,000 guys in Pokrovsk that they should have withdrawn. Highly trained troops are gone forever. And now without those troops, there is no fire brigade to move around, and the Russians are exploiting this. Vladimir Putin is going to do this. Now, the interesting thing is, he had made a promise early on that he wasn't going to kill Zelensky or Zelensky's cabinet. He said, no, we're not going to do that. And as a result, the Ukrainian government has been able to act with impunity. I mean, they imagine inviting foreign leaders to the capital of a nation at war and parading around. If they were really at war, there would be no trains to have them come in on, and all the foreign advisors, would be dead. But no, the Ukraine it's open season. Everybody gets to visit, and Zelensky gets to travel to, fro, and everywhere. And even after he, refused to hold elections, the Russians said he's not the legitimate president, but he is the head of the regime. So they were willing to recognize him as the head of the regime and carry out negotiations with the head of the regime, with the understanding that before the whatever agreement was finalized, there had to be elections and a real leader, constitutional leader, appointed. But at least they were saying Zelensky's the head of a regime. After the events that culminated with the assassination attempt against President Putin, they've called Zelensky a terrorist at the head of a terrorist organization. This is a game-changing event. So this means that it's a death sentence to Zelensky and his cabinet. They may not know it yet, but they will not survive this. They will be hunted down and they will be killed. There will be no, amnesty. Notice they threw that in there as part of the negotiation. Got to have an amnesty. The Russians aren't going to give you amnesty. You're Stepan Bandera 2.0. You're a dead man walking. And that's how this is going to end.
Does the Kremlin understand that Trump authorized the attack on Putin's house?
Yeah, that's why they gave us the chip. Remember, the head of the Russian military intelligence handed over a guidance chip to the American defense attaché in Moscow. Now, they didn't say anything. They just said, here's the chip. And on this chip is all the information. And on that chip is all the information. But the thing is, the Americans know what's on that chip because we programmed that chip. We were trying to tell lies because I guess we believed that the drones, when they hit, would blow up and the chips would be unrecoverable. They had a fully functioning intact chip. Apparently, you have 21 of those. And they gave it to the United States. And when you reverse engineer that, as the Russians did, it becomes crystal clear what the target was. It was the presidential residence. That's what the Russians say, and that's what the data shows. And how it was collected, when it was collected, who packaged it, who processed it. The nature of the digital data on that chip could only have been assembled in one place, not Palantir operating in Germany using commercially available data, which is what the front cover is. Palantir is there doing this, but they're given a data packet from a United States Department of Defense activity in Europe that packages targeting data for Tomahawk missiles and for other advanced American weapon systems. They're the ones that took American intelligence data, packaged it into a digital package, gave it to Palantir, who gave it to the Ukrainians, who loaded it into the chip. But when you reverse engineer that, you realize that the data could only come from specific assets and assembled in a specific place. The Russians know everything. And when they gave that chip over, they were saying, we know everything.
What is in, under, or closely affiliated with that residence?
Look, it's a presidential residence. If you go to Camp David, there will be a skiff where classified data, and there will be a bunker that the president can retreat to in case of attack. So this is a presidential complex. The residence is one thing, but there will be for instance, there is a presidential communications facility there that maintains all of the connectivity necessary for Russia to operate in time of war, in time of peace, in time of emergency. Presidential communication facility. There will be security facilities nearby. Also the personnel that man the place, maintain the residence, just like at Camp David. I mean, I went to the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland, I believe it is. And, we were told, don't get drunk and wander in that direction, because if you go in the woods in that direction about 100 yards, there's going to be a Marine in a ghillie suit jumping out of the ground and butt stroking you and taking you prisoner, because you now have entered into the exclusion zone for Camp David. The Russians do the same thing for this retreat. And so what the United States is trying to say is we weren't targeting the residents. We were trying to target something else. But the Russians are very specific. And again, I know the Russians. If it wasn't the residents, they wouldn't have said the residents. The fact that they said the residents, committed to that, and then turned over a chip means on that chip, it isn't the coordinates for this other facility. That's the lie told by the CIA. It's the coordinate for the residents.